This was probably the strangest job interview in the world. The interviewer told the interviewee to swallow the pill on the table. The 47-year-old Bunta had no choice. He closed his eyes and popped it into his mouth.
合格です。たった今からあなたはエスパーです。はい。はい。
What kind of company was this run by? How could taking a pill grant someone superpowers? Not only that, the company also provided Bunta with a fake wife, and ordered the two of them to pretend to be husband and wife 24 hours a day and night, just when Bunta thought things couldn't get any weirder. The various tasks assigned by the company were beyond bizarre, like sneaking to set Sato's alarm clock 5 minutes ahead, while he was asleep, or draining all the battery from Takahashi's phone before 2 p.m. As Bunta gritted his teeth and plowed through the tasks, he gradually realized that he actually had the power of mind reading. As long as his hand touched another person's body, he could tell what that person was thinking. What on earth was going on? Let's start from the very beginning of the story. The leading man Bunta was going through the lowest point in his life. First, he got fired from his job, and then his marriage fell apart. With his savings rapidly running out, Bunta finally received an interview invitation from a mysterious company named Nanamare. He searched for it online, and saw the company's vague and ambiguous description. Thinking it was probably a terrible company, but figuring he had nothing to lose, Bunta still showed up at the interview venue. To his surprise, the office building was quite magnificent. Bunta performed very well during the interview, but there was one question he couldn't answer.
それだけ覚悟のあるあなたがどうして無職なんでしょう?
Faced with the interrogative question, Bunta didn't say a word. He thought he had completely blown the interview, but to his surprise, the interviewer chased after him to ask why he had hesitated. In reality, Bunta had been fired because his previous company had accused him of embezzlement, but the truth was, he had only used the money to cover entertainment expenses that couldn't be reimbursed without receipts. Everyone in the company did the same thing. It was just that the company had chosen to make an example out of Bunta to warn the others. To avoid a lawsuit, he had agreed to pay back all the money over the past 10 years. When his wife found out, she immediately asked for a divorce and tried to get her hands on what was left of his assets. She also demanded alimony payments. Nowadays, what company would want to hire a 47-year-old man who had been charged with embezzlement? Bunta was almost completely hopeless. The young interviewer suddenly confessed that he was actually Cho, the president of Nanamare. He said he had a job that was perfect for Bunta, and hoped Bunta would come for the final interview. When the final interview started, Cho asked Bunta to swallow a small pill. Without explaining what it was, Bunta had to pop it into his mouth. Cho broke into a satisfied smile, and announced that he had passed the interview. From now on, you are a superhero. Bunta was completely dumbfounded. What did this mean? Was it some kind of new interview trick? Cho explained that swallowing the pill would grant him a tiny bit of superpower, and the company's job was to save the world. During their employment, employees weren't allowed to tell anyone about their jobs. The company would provide accommodation, and assign a female colleague to live with Bunta. The two of them would pretend to be a married couple, and live together. Of course, this was just a temporary disguise, just for show. But the two of them were strictly forbidden from talking about superpowers at home. They had to chat just like an ordinary couple. Additionally, the mission explicitly said, falling in love with anyone is prohibited. Bunta opened the dormitory door. With a million questions swirling in his head, his fake wife Shiki had already prepared dinner. Bunta kept Chao's reminder in mind, and tried to talk to Shiki as naturally as possible, but pretending to be married to a complete stranger was an indescribable awkward experience. On the other hand, Shiki was surprisingly good at it, as if she really saw Bunta as her husband. She even complained about how cold he had been since returning from his business trip.
何か劇団とかお芝居をご職業になさってる女優さんですか?
何ごっこなのそれ?
After dinner, Bunta took a shower. Feeling very uneasy, then he offered to sleep on the sofa. Shiki said the sofa cover hadn't been changed yet, and told him to sleep in the bed first. Bunta didn't think much of it, said good night, and snuggled under the covers, ready to sleep. But before long, Shiki also walked into the bedroom, and lay down in the same bed as him. Bunta jumped up immediately, saying it was just a show. Did she really have to go this far? Bunta already had the stigma of embezzlement hanging over his head, and he didn't want to be labeled as a creepy old man guilty of sexual harassment.
私のこと嫌いになった？離婚したいって思ってる？漬物石より重い女もういらない？
Bunta couldn't help but wonder if there were hidden cameras around. Shiki was practically an Oscar-winning actress. He resigned himself to his fate, lay back down, and forced himself to fall asleep. Shiki snuggled up beside him obediently. Early the next morning, when Bunta got up and finished getting ready, Shiki had already pickled a huge barrel of green plums, and greeted and joked with him just like an ordinary wife would. Just then, a man named Hanzo called Bunta over to a nearby Takoyaki shop. Hanzo was also an employee of Nanamare Corporation. He handed Bunta the password for logging into the company's program, and then left, leading his dog by the leash. Shiki also headed out for work. Bunta scanned the QR code, and logged onto the company's website. 3 poker cards with daily tasks written on them appeared on the screen. Bunta clicked on task number 52, it read, "Make sure Takuma Suzuki carries an umbrella with him all day," with the specific coordinates listed below. Is this what they call saving the world? It sounds so unreliable. Bunta waited in ambush outside Suzuki's front door, and as the man was about to leave the house, he walked past the door in a very deliberate manner, muttering loudly to himself, "It looks like it's going to rain today. I heard it's going to be the heaviest downpour of the year. Should I go back to get my umbrella?" Suzuki glanced up at the blazing sun overhead, hesitated for a moment, and then took an umbrella with him anyway. Bunta pulled out his phone and tapped on the next task. Set Mitsuru Sato's alarm clock 5 minutes ahead, while he's asleep. Even though he thought the task was ridiculous, he still made his way to Sato's front door. But the door was locked tight and the windows were shut. How was he supposed to get his hands on the alarm clock? Bunta suddenly remembered that he had superpowers. Could it be something like telekinesis? He held out his hand, and tried to move the alarm clock with his mind. Frustrated, Bunta turned around and ran into the landlady. Bunta lied and said that he was Sato's friend. He had something urgent to tell him. To his surprise, the landlady actually opened the door for Bunta. He walked over and set the alarm clock forward. Never would he have imagined that the next task would be even more outrageous. Drain all the battery power of Kensuke Takahashi's phone before 2 p.m. People these days are glued to their phones all the time. How on earth could he drain someone else's battery? Bunta felt a headache coming on, but by a stroke of luck, Takahashi suddenly got a stomachache. He dropped his phone and hurried off to the bathroom. Bunta picked it up right away to check, and saw that it still had 48% battery left. He quickly turned the screen brightness up to maximum, then turned on the flashlight. Along with all the apps running in the background, Bunta picked the most battery-draining game and started playing it. But just as the battery level dropped to 5%, Takahashi had already come out of the bathroom. A flower delivery worker pushing a cart got stuck in traffic, buying Bunta quite a bit of extra time. By the time Takahashi went back to his seat, all he saw was a dead phone. Bunta let out a sigh of relief. Now that all 3 tasks were completed, he was about to make a call to ask what he should do next. Mid-sentence, he spotted Suzuki, the target of his first task, walking by without an umbrella in hand. Bunta couldn't help but recall the task requirements. It was to make sure he carried the umbrella for the whole day. It seemed the task wasn't fully completed after all. Just then, a convenience store clerk ran up to him, shoved an umbrella and a briefcase into his hands, saying that these items had been left on the counter. Bunta recognized the umbrella as Suzuki's, thinking that the clerk must have mistaken him for someone else. He took the umbrella and quickly caught up with Mr. Suzuki, telling him that he had left some things at the convenience store.
お知り合いでしたっけ？近所のものですよ。親切な人だな。手が慣れ慣れしいけど。慣れ慣れしい。
Bunta had clearly read the other person's mind just now. He might have finally figured out what his superpower was. Bunta sought out several more people to test it on. Sure enough, he could read people's minds as soon as he touched their bodies. The experience was truly eye-opening. Bunta would sneak a touch on everyone he met, but gradually, he began to be affected by everyone's negative emotions, men and women, young and old on the street. Beneath their seemingly calm exteriors lay nothing but weariness of their tiring lives.
支払い間に合わねえよ。
俺以外みんな楽しそう。
なんで生きてんだっけ？
Just as Bunta was wallowing in his sorrow alone, Shiki happened to pass by after work. She could tell Bunta was in a low mood, and deliberately mentioned that the day of the fireworks display was drawing near.
ここに上がるんですか？
違う、プロポーズの日のこと。
In Shiki's story, Bunta had formally proposed to her on a night when fireworks were lighting up the sky. The pickling stone used for preserving green plums that morning had also been carefully chosen for her by her husband. Shiki told the story in such a detailed and earnest manner. If Bunta hadn't known that everyone was putting on an act, he would have almost believed it was true. He teased Shiki for having such a vivid imagination, but she seemed a little annoyed after hearing that. She accused Bunta of acting weird ever since yesterday. Shiki's attitude was really hard to figure out. Bunta was about to secretly eavesdrop on her thoughts. Unexpectedly, the next second he heard the landlady calling out to him. It turned out she wasn't a landlady at all, but also one of the employees of Nanamare Corporation. Bunta told the fake landlady, "I think Shiki is acting a bit strange. Her acting is way too convincing." But the fake landlady said that Shiki wasn't acting at all. Just go along with what she says and chat with her. This is also part of your job. Could it be that Shiki really saw Bunta as her husband? Bunta followed everyone to the takoyaki shop for a meal. He didn't expect to run into the convenience store clerk from earlier that day. It turned out he was also an employee of Nanamare Corporation. No wonder Bunta's first day at work had gone so smoothly. It turned out the company had arranged for other people to help him behind the scenes. Earlier, when Takahashi had rushed to the bathroom, it was also because the convenience store clerk had put laxatives in his coffee. Bunta asked several colleagues, "I didn't do a single serious task today. Can I really get paid?" The fake landlady told Bunta to relax. "Our company isn't short of money. The boss has more than enough assets on hand. This is just a way for wealthy people to give back to society." For example, Suzuki paid off his debts just because he took an umbrella with him. Sato woke up 5 minutes earlier and got promoted successfully. Takahashi was able to get married smoothly just because his phone died. These seemingly meaningless tasks were actually quietly changing other people's fates. Tiny efforts, when accumulated over time, can become the power to save the world. No sooner had the words been spoken than Sakusuk, the convenience store clerk, insisted on showing off his superpower. He held out his hand and brushed it over the morning glory trellis in the yard. In an instant, the flowers bloomed and burst with vitality. It turned out Sakusuk was a plant-type esper. The group watched the trellis with rapt attention, not noticing that a young man outside the yard had seen the whole scene. The secret of the superpowers had been leaked. After the initial shock, Bunta thought Sakusuk's ability was pretty useless. How could making flowers bloom save the world? The fake landlady explained that there was no need to dwell on this. We're not the Avengers, just a bunch of people with a little bit of superpower. Just then, Shiki walked over carrying some food. The fake landlady warned Bunta, "Don't tell Shiki the secret about the espers. She's not an employee of the company, and knows nothing about the mission to save the world." This was completely different from what Cho had said, but Bunta didn't dislike Shiki. He carefully took his fake wife's hand.
いつまでもこうしてたい。愛してる。
For a few seconds, Bunta seemed to hear the sound of fireworks bursting, but in Nanamare, you weren't allowed to fall in love with anyone. In the days that followed, Bunta deliberately kept his distance. When sleeping, he only lay in the corner furthest away. This distant attitude hurt Shiki deeply, but there was nothing he could do about it. Bunta couldn't possibly take advantage of others. When he returned to the company, he was given new capsules. Cho told him to take one capsule every week, and explained that strictly speaking, this wasn't a drug that directly granted superpowers to people. What kind of ability one would develop exactly depended on the individual. Since Bunta's superpower was mind reading, it meant he was originally someone who was good at reading other people's minds. Bunta then asked for the details of the 3 tasks from the previous day, wanting to know how those trivial matters had affected the target individuals. Cho explained that Mr. Suzuki had met a millionaire who had lost his walking stick that night. He lent his umbrella to the man to use as a walking stick, and in return, he received a large sum of money to pay off his debts. Mr. Sato, having woken up 5 minutes earlier, not only arrived at the company on time, but also ran into the regional manager. If he had been late, he wouldn't have gotten the promotion opportunity. Mr. Takahashi was supposed to meet someone he had met on a dating app, but because his phone had died, he hadn't been able to make it to the date. In fact, that person wasn't his soulmate at all. Logically, these things were supposed to happen in the future, yet the company knew all about them. It seemed that the employees here really did all have superpowers. Bunta had originally wanted to ask a few more questions about Shiki, but Cho refused to say anything more, telling him only to play his role as a husband well, and then finish the tasks assigned by the company. Task number 57 was to stop Chisamori from reaching his destination, yet it didn't specify what that destination was. This task required him to work together with Hanzo, the fake landlady Sanazono, and Sakusuk. Sanazono learned from the Community Intelligence Network that Chisamori was an artist. This place was both his residence and his studio, and sometimes he even taught painting at home. Just then, Chisamori walked out carrying his painting bag. Sakusuk had already removed the bumper from his car beforehand, yet Chisamori didn't notice it at all. Sakusuk quickly picked up the bumper and chased after him, reminding him that something had fallen off, and offering to help reinstall it. He took the chance to eavesdrop on Chisamori's phone call, and found out that the latter was going to Tojendai Port at Lake Ashi to play golf with a friend. Bunta suggested hailing a taxi to follow Chisamori. After all, he would definitely head out once his car was fixed. Upon hearing this, Mrs. Sanazono called Shiki over. The laundromat where she worked was closed for the day, so they could borrow Shiki's car. Sanazono lied, saying that Bunta's client had cancelled the appointment at the last minute, so they had decided to go out for a drive, since Shiki had nothing to do anyway. She acted as the driver, and took the 4 of them to follow Chisamori. Bunta spoke half-truthfully, saying that their client was sitting in that red car, and that their job for the day was to stop that man from going to Lake Ashi. The easiest way, of course, would be to crash into his car, but the van Shiki was driving belonged to the laundromat, and it couldn't get damaged in any way. On the way of tracking, Bunta learned about Sanazono's ability. She was like a human microwave, able to heat things up anytime and anywhere. but everyone only had a little bit of superpower, so Sanazono's heating ability was limited, and she couldn't heat things up to boiling temperatures. Upon hearing this, Bunta came up with an idea. He told Shiki to speed up and get close to the car ahead, then asked Sanazono to heat up Chisumori's bladder, because Bunta had read online that, when blood flow to the bladder increases, the kidneys filter blood faster, making people need to urinate in a short time. But no matter how hard Sanazono tried, Chisumori didn't react at all. Instead, Bunta suddenly felt a pressing urge to pee. Luckily, there was a service area up ahead. Both Bunta and Chisumori pulled over to use the restroom.
300万その価値があるのか危ない巨大な虫が背中に
Chisumori even thanked Bunta, because he had overheard a mention of 3 million yen earlier, coupled with the fact that Chisumori was carrying his painting bag. Could it be that he was going to sell a painting? But according to Sanazono's information, Chisumori only made a living by painting posters and signboards, nowhere near successful enough to sell a painting for 3 million yen. Just then, Shiki came back with a lot of things. She specially handed Bunta some potato mochi. She remembered that her husband loved this snack the most, but Bunta didn't like potato mochi at all. He was about to politely decline, but Sanazono pinched his arm to warn him, so he had to grit his teeth and say he liked it. Chisumori soon returned to his car. The group squeezed into the van and quickly followed him. At this rate, they would soon reach Lake Ashi. Just as Bunta was getting anxious, Hanzo suddenly rolled down the window. A flock of pigeons, as if responding to his signal, flew over Chisumori's car in a dense group, and started defecating without restraint. Speckles of bird droppings covered the windshield. When the wipers swiped across, it looked like smearing a layer of cream. Chisumori had no choice but to stop the car. Hanzo got out of the van and thanked the pigeons. It turned out his superpower was similar to a Disney princess's. He could communicate with animals, but it should be noted that Hanzo's ability wasn't controlling animals, but merely communicating with them. He had bought a big bag of popcorn at the service area to persuade the pigeons to help, but no one expected that Chisumori would hail a taxi right away. Still clinging to the idea of going to Lake Ashi, there was a cable car system here. Tojendai Station, which Sakusuk had overheard mention of, was the final stop on the cable car line. Just as Chisumori was about to head for his destination, Shiki called out to him, asking Chisumori to help take a group photo. Sakusuk thought to himself that maybe he could take the chance to destroy the painting. At this point, Chisumori, who had just finished taking the photo, suddenly recognized them as the people who had helped him take pictures of bugs and reinstall his bumper. He was about to speak up and ask, when Sakusuk rushed over and knocked the painting bag out of his hand. Chisumori hurried over anxiously to check. Luckily, the painting wasn't scratched. It depicted a little yellow angel. Judging from the signature, it was a late work by Paul Klee, with a market price of around 20 million yen. Bunta touched Chisumori and heard his thoughts. But this painting is fake. It's a forgery I painted myself. It seemed that someone had paid Chisumori 3 million yen to make the forgery, planning to sell the fake painting for 20 million yen. Now, if Chisumori wanted to get to Tojendai Station, he had to transfer at Owakudani Station, so Bunta and the others squeezed into the cable car as well. They arrived at Owakudani Station in no time. Chisumori was about to transfer with the painting, when Bunta stopped him halfway. He enthusiastically invited Chisumori to have a meal together.
朝から何も食べてない。人間空腹だと判断が鈍ります。人生の重大な局面の前には飯を食わないと。
Bunta cleverly persuaded Chisumori, and they had a meal together at a curry restaurant. Chisumori couldn't help but say, actually, I should have been meeting someone at Tojendai at this time, but nothing has gone right since this morning. First I lost the bumper, then I was attacked by a flock of pigeons. It feels like even God is trying to stop me. But Chisumori couldn't afford to give up this opportunity. Life costs money, and dreams cost money. It's simply impossible to make a living on art alone. When people are driven into a corner, can they do nothing but cling to every chance they get? Upon hearing this, Bunta couldn't help but think of himself. Finally, he mustered up his courage and said, I embezzled public funds at my previous company. I overclaimed a bit on expenses for entertaining clients. Back then, I always thought that since I was the one who brought in the business, it didn't matter if I did this little thing. Anyway, I didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt, and I never thought I would end up being a criminal. Because of it, during the 10 years I worked at the company, I embezzled around 3 million yen this way. Now that I think about it, it was just a small sum of money, nothing compared to what I lost because of it. Sometimes, the chances that lie right in front of you will slip through your fingers even if you manage to grab them. But if you want to reach for it, then go ahead. After all, the value of this world really is measured by money.
金欲しがって何が悪いって言うんですか。
お金じゃありません。私が掴もうとしている藁は絵の価値そのものと言ってもいい。
Chisumori talked about a painting by Jean Metzinger that was Once exhibited at the Prefectural Art Museum, someone discovered that it was a forgery painted in imitation of the artist's style. The museum had spent 67.2 million yen to purchase it back then. Over the past 25 years, hundreds of thousands of visitors had regarded it as a precious work of art. No one had cared at all whether it was genuine or not, and no one had paid attention to how much effort the artist had poured into the painting, as long as it hung in the museum and looked like the real thing, then it could be called art. This made Chisumori feel resentful and ridiculous. It seemed meaningless for him to keep on creating. After all, his original works would never be hung in a museum anyway. Upon hearing this, Bunta no longer wanted to stop Chisumori. If he wanted to take revenge on the world, then so be it. After all, the world had never been on the side of us poor people. With only 2 stops left to go, Sakosuke was ready to drag Chisumori off the cable car, but unexpectedly was stopped by Bunta. The two of them got into a fierce fight over this. In the end, the cable car still arrived at Tojendai Station. After getting off the cable car, Chisumori didn't go forward but boarded the one heading back. It seemed that Bunta's words had worked to some extent. Chisumori was unwilling to admit defeat just like that. He still wanted to see if his paintings could make a name for themselves and be hung in a museum someday. At this point, Bunta looked at Shiki, who was taking photos by the lake, wondering what kind of story had happened to her. Hanzo explained that Shiki's husband had actually died in an accident. It was said that he had died a terrible death, and Shiki had seen the whole incident. She couldn't accept her husband's death, and now she had been treating Bunta as a substitute. To Shiki, it didn't matter who the other person was, as long as someone could act with her and live with her in a fantasy, as long as Shiki could be happy. What did it matter even if it was all fake? Maybe saving the world really was meaningless, but making the people around you happy is still very meaningful. That is also the reason why Sanazono and the others took this job. All in all, everyone breathed a sigh of relief as the new task was successfully completed. Over on Chisumori's side, he had just finished wiping the bird droppings off his car window when a sudden gust of wind blew his rag away. Chisumori rushed forward instinctively, but a truck came speeding toward him. That night, Shiki dreamed that Bunta was in a car accident and jolted awake instantly. When Bunta heard about her dream, he felt a pang of discomfort in his heart, for Shiki hadn't yet gotten over the grief of her husband's death. He couldn't help but ask Hanzo, since Shiki wasn't an employee of Nanamari, why was she allowed to live in the staff dormitory? Hanzo explained that Shiki was the daughter of the boss's friend, and he was entrusted with looking after her. At first, Shiki was consumed by a strong desire to die. Mrs. Sanazono had no choice but to lie to the distraught Shiki, saying, "Your husband is away on a business trip." But to her surprise, Shiki actually believed this lie. She gradually recovered and stopped having suicidal thoughts, but the husband away on business never came back. Shiki's mental state began to fluctuate again. That was why the boss arranged for Bunta to be her fake husband. The company hadn't assigned any new tasks these past few days, so Bunta's life was very dull. Every day, he spent his time pulling weeds, collecting trash, and doing recycling work, because Cho said that heroes who save the world must have a strong sense of responsibility and noble character. Even simple tasks like cleaning streets and communities are part of saving the world. Bunta was still not used to this kind of life, where he could get paid for doing so little work. He began to grow curious about the other employees, so he asked Sakosuke if he knew what Hanzo did. Before joining the company, all Bunta knew was that Hanzo was very fond of animals. Whenever he saw a stray animal or a pitiful-looking pet in a pet shop, he couldn't resist bringing it home. In the end, it made his house look like a zoo. It would take him hours just to clean up all the animal waste. Nowadays, Hanzo would cross the street just to avoid passing by a pet shop, but Sakosuke said you shouldn't judge a person by their appearance. He leaned in close to Bunta and said in a mysterious tone, "Hanzo used to be a killer, you know." Upon hearing this, Bunta felt a lingering sense of fear. He didn't even dare to talk casually to Hanzo anymore.
大介、お前また何か言った？え？また俺のこと殺人犯とか言ったんじゃないの？
Mrs. Sanazono stepped in to explain. Hanzo used to be a police officer in the K9 unit. He accidentally discovered a dog breeder who had crammed 50 dogs into a tiny room for breeding. Hanzo immediately reported the breeder to the animal control center and his superiors, but he didn't receive any response at all. In the end, he broke into the place and rescued all the dogs, but he was spotted halfway and got into a fight with the breeder. He almost killed the man. This incident landed Hanzo in jail and got him kicked out of the police force. No wonder his superpower now was the ability to understand the thoughts of small animals. Speaking of which, the superpower capsules for this week were almost used up. Bunta and Sakosuke went to the company together to get more supplies. Cho reminded them that they must collect the capsules before they ran out of stock, because once the effects wore off, they would lose their superpowers, and when that happened, they would be fired from the company, with no chance of being rehired. This crazy company certainly had a lot of rules. Cho added an offhand remark, I suggest you relocate your flower shop, Sakosuke. Don't set up too close to your family. It was then that Bunta found out that Sakosuke actually had a son, but the boy didn't know that his father was still alive. Sakosuke could only watch over his family from the shadows. His son's name was Cheyenne, which was the name of a flower, because when his wife was pregnant, she hoped their child would have a name as beautiful as a flower, just like Sakosuke's. The couple had been deeply in love. After their child was born, Sakosuke worked even harder at the dock. He wanted to provide the best possible life for his family, but the shadows of his past soon caught up with him. Before getting married, Sakosuke had been a small-time gangster who was good at stealing things. His old gang members tried to lure him back into a life of crime, threatening to harm his family if he refused. In a fit of rage, Sakosuke killed the man. His wife couldn't understand his extreme actions. She also didn't want their child to grow up as the son of a murderer, so she filed for divorce and remarried 2 years later. Starting a new family, Cheyenne had been too young when Sakosuke was imprisoned to have any memory of his biological father. The father and son had no further contact with each other, until one day, when Sakosuke was out on a mission, he heard someone calling Cheyenne near a school. He knew he couldn't disturb his son's life, so he didn't say a word. Instead, he opened a flower shop on the route Cheyenne took to school, watching his son from afar. Now, the nearby shrine was going to hold a festival. Everyone had made plans to go together. A new mission suddenly came in: prevent people from being killed in an explosion. It said that the incident would occur at 4:24 p.m., which meant there were less than 30 minutes left, and the location was the shrine where the festival was being held. It was the first time they had met with such a serious mission. Mrs. Sanazono immediately collapsed to the ground, pretending to have a heart attack. She also said she couldn't bear to miss the candied apples sold at the shrine. Everyone immediately got the hint, and told Shiki to stay home with Mrs. Sanazono. The rest of them would go out to buy the candied apples, but when they arrived at the shrine, they unexpectedly saw Sakosuke's son Cheyenne there. With only 20 minutes left before the explosion was supposed to happen, the three of them immediately began searching everywhere for the bomb. Bunta found a faulty electrical device that was leaking electricity behind a stall. He carefully turned it off. Meanwhile, Hanzo's Shiba Inu was sniffing around everywhere. It finally zeroed in on a man carrying a large bag. The man clutched his bag tightly and refused to say what was inside. Bunta tried to read the man's mind, but the guy was quick to react. He dodged Bunta's hand several times. In the end, Sakosuke had to tackle the man to the ground. As soon as he said this, an old man ran over, snatched the man's backpack, and dumped its contents on the ground. It was filled with things like game controllers. It turned out the man was just an ordinary thief, not a dangerous bomber at all. The reason the Shiba Inu had been chasing him was that there were dried sweet potatoes in the bag, the dog's favorite snack. This whole detour had wasted a lot of precious time. The three of them rushed back to the center of the festival. Luckily, as soon as they arrived, they spotted a gas leak. This must have been the cause of the impending explosion. Hanzo and Sakosuke went over to shut off the gas valve, but then a stall owner noticed the electrical device that Bunta had turned off. He muttered a complaint and flipped the switch to turn it back on. Bunta tried to stop him, but it was too late. He saw a boy standing closest to the leak. Without a second thought, he lunged forward to push the boy out of the way. Sakosuke also grabbed an iron sheet to shield his son. The next second, the gas exploded. Shiki, who was still at home, heard the explosion too. She remembered the nightmare she'd had the night before, and rushed to the shrine in a panic. Thankfully, Bunta and the others were unharmed. They had even managed to buy the candied apples that Mrs. Sanazono wanted. But among the crowd, a man wearing a mask turned around and walked away coldly. He was the same man who had spied on Sakosuke using his superpower earlier. Cho also detected the emergence of an unknown variable, but he couldn't figure out what it meant for the time being. Luckily, the mission was still a complete success. Shiki had caught a slight cold from being so frightened. She took some medicine and lay back down to rest. Bunta was about to leave for work when he noticed that one of the superpower capsules was missing. Shiki had accidentally taken it, thinking it was cold medicine. This was going to be a big problem. Bunta hurried to find Hanzo and the others to figure out a solution, but the incident of the three of them stopping the explosion made the news, nearly exposing their identities. Cho had just flown into a rage over this incident. It was definitely not a good time to go and rub him the wrong way, so the four of them agreed unanimously that they shouldn't tell the boss about this for the time being. It was said that only a tiny handful of people couldn't gain superpowers even after taking the capsule. What if Shiki was one of them? They decided to wait and see what would happen first. Bunta observed Shiki secretly, and didn't notice anything unusual about her, so he took the initiative to probe Shiki. If you could have any superpower, what kind of ability would you want?
一瞬でシミが消せる能力。
true to her roots as a laundry shop worker, the power she wanted was surprisingly simple and unadorned. Bunta fetched a dirty rag, and told her to try removing the stains with her mind. Although Shiki was confused, she cooperated obediently. Luckily, no miracle happened, the rag remained completely unchanged. Bunta breathed a sigh of relief for the moment, and went to carry out his new mission, catch the bride's bouquet. Mrs. Sanazono dressed herself up elaborately, and snuck into the wedding venue with Bunta and the others. They snatched the bouquet effortlessly. The subsequent missions were also not very challenging. They included things like refill the copy paper, drain the bathtub water, and change the plain bed sheets to patterned ones. Bunta gradually adapted to this kind of life, and stopped complaining about how weird the mission sounded, because a person's fate could often be changed by these trivial little details. During this time, Mrs. Sanazono had been practicing her superpowers diligently. She could now heat water up to 38 degrees Celsius, with just one hand. Inspired by Mrs. Sanazono, Hanzo also kept developing his own superpowers. He tried to understand the thoughts of insects. Because the smaller an animal's brain was, the harder it was to communicate with them. Recently, Hanzo had been focusing on cracking the code of woodlice. The two of them suggested that Bunta should also train his abilities. Hanzo volunteered to be his guinea pig. Bunta discovered that the closer he was to a person's head, the easier it was to read their mind. Hanzo suddenly remembered the incident of Shiki accidentally taking the capsule, and couldn't help asking if she had shown any signs of superpowers yet. Bunta said there was nothing unusual so far, but Shiki had been feeling like someone was spying on their house lately. Bunta didn't take it too seriously. Little did he know that someone had indeed spied on them using their superpowers, and that very night, Shiki brought that peeping Tom home with her. She introduced him to everyone as Ikamatsu, a customer from the laundry shop. Just like her, he was a huge fan of takoyaki. He had even joined the takoyaki research club at his school. The two of them hit it off immediately and became friends. Seeing how much Shiki liked Ikamatsu, Bunta felt a twinge of jealousy. Luckily, Shiki introduced him very openly. She said Bunta was her husband. Bunta was secretly delighted, and looked for a chance to read Ikamatsu's mind.
可愛くていい人なのに、どうして？
どうして？
Bunta brushed it off casually, but he still couldn't help making a few jealous remarks. Shiki saw right through him, but instead of getting angry, she was actually very happy. Bunta still thought Ikamatsu had bad motives, so he secretly asked Hanzo to follow him, but they found out that this guy was an elite student at the Tokyo Institute of Technology. This made Bunta even more annoyed. He sneaked into the takoyaki club, and asked the other members about Ikamatsu. He learned that Ikamatsu had suddenly joined the club last month. What's more, it seemed like he was in his third year of college. For the second time, logically speaking, he shouldn't have had time to join a club like this. Not having found out much information, Bunta went around asking Ikamatsu's classmates what kind of girls he liked. Then he eavesdropped on their thoughts. In the end, he came to the conclusion that Ikamatsu seemed to be just a very ordinary student. At this point, Bunta was deceiving himself. He thought all his actions were just to protect Shiki from harm. But the fluttering feeling in his heart couldn't lie. He had already developed real feelings for her. Shortly after the two of them left the school, Ikamatsu pulled up Shiki's information on his computer. He had indeed approached her on purpose, but what exactly was Ikamatsu's purpose? That afternoon, Bunta went to pick up Shiki from the laundry shop. For the first time in a long while, the owner and his wife had probably heard of him. They asked Bunta if he had prepared a birthday surprise for his wife. It was then that Bunta realized that today was Shiki's birthday. He hurried to the mall to pick out a gift, but Bunta and his ex-wife had never celebrated birthdays or anniversaries. He really didn't know the first thing about this sort of thing. He wandered around for ages, his mind filled with the thought of making Shiki happy. He wanted to get her something better than the pickle stone her late husband had given her. But Bunta was disappointed to realize that he didn't even know what Shiki liked. In the end, he went back home empty-handed. He just said happy birthday. Luckily, Shiki didn't mind at all. To her, the sight of Bunta being at a loss because he couldn't find a gift was already precious enough, and most importantly, at this point,
誕生日明日だよ。
a noise came from downstairs. A dark figure flashed past quickly. Without a second thought, Bunta chased after it immediately. But the man disappeared in the blink of an eye. After Bunta had run far away, Ikamatsu poked his head out from behind the bushes. He let out a sigh of relief and returned to his apartment. He made a phone call to someone named AI, but halfway through the call, the power suddenly went out. Ikamatsu opened the distribution box at the door, and found it covered with woodlice. The next second, he was caught by Bunta. It turned out that Bunta hadn't lost track of him that day. Instead, he had pretended to be shaken off on purpose. Then he had tailed Ikamatsu instead. Bunta warned him to focus on his studies, and stop stalking innocent women. Ikamatsu apologized immediately.
色彩のストーカーだと思ってる。このまま逃げ切ろう。
After reading his mind, Bunta continued to press Ikamatsu about his motives. Upon hearing this, Ikematsu handed him a leaflet. It said Superpower Research Society on it. Then he earnestly begged Bunta to take him as his apprentice. Ikematsu explained that a few evenings ago, he had smelled the scent of takoyaki coming from someone's yard. He couldn't help peeking inside. He hadn't expected to see Sakosuke making morning glories bloom instantly. That was how he had accidentally found out about the existence of superpowers. Ikematsu had even found out that Mr. Hanzo's ability was to communicate with animals, but he hadn't figured out Bunta's power yet. In any case, he also hoped to gain superpowers. Bunta had a sudden brainwave and said, "I can teach you how to get superpowers, but in exchange, you have to keep this a secret." Ikematsu listened eagerly, but Bunta made up a bunch of nonsense. He said that to get superpowers, you had to do 100 sit-ups, 50 push-ups every day, and hold a levitating sitting position for 30 minutes.
ほいっと身につくような都合のいい能力はない。滲むような訓練をしろ。
After fooling him, Bunta left without any guilt whatsoever. After all, he hadn't confessed the incident of Shiki accidentally taking the capsule either. He had no intention of telling the boss about this accident. As long as he made sure Ikematsu didn't spill the secret, everything would be fine. At the same time, Sakosuke was doing push-ups in his flower shop, for no apparent reason. It turned out that since the Shrine Festival explosion incident, Cheyenne had been coming to the flower shop, from time to time to buy flowers for his mother. He was very grateful to Sakosuke for saving his life. He also said he admired Sakosuke's strong muscles. This made Sakosuke over the moon, so he exercised whenever he had the chance. Little did he know that, as soon as Cheyenne walked out of the flower shop, he threw the bouquet into the trash. Could it be that he already knew Sakosuke was his biological father? The next day was Shiki's birthday. Bunta planned to set aside the whole day to spend with her. The two of them even picked out a gift together. It was a necklace with a little bee pendant, because Shiki thought Bunta was just like a bee. While Bunta was feeling happy, he caught sight of the reminder on his phone case, "Don't fall in love." He had already broken far too many rules, and he had no idea where things would go from here. The two of them returned home and prepared a birthday cake together. It turned out that Shiki's superpower was equivalent to that of a human hairdryer. Ikematsu and Cheyenne were actually meeting up. A girl with a ponytail brought them 2 capsules. The plot of the story was becoming more and more complicated and confusing. Bunta didn't know what had come over him. After seeing Shiki awaken her powers, he spilled the beans about having superpowers himself. Mrs. Sanazono and the others also stopped hiding the truth. They gathered around to show off their superpowers. Just like kids putting on a show during the new year, they had long since thrown the company's rules out the window. But Bunta repeatedly reminded Shiki that she must never tell anyone about having superpowers, because their jobs required complete confidentiality. Bunta thought Shiki was one of them now, so he figured he could tell the boss about her, on a day when he was in a good mood. After all, Shiki's superpower was so powerful, who knew, the boss might even be happy to hear about it. No sooner had he finished speaking, than the 4 of them received a text message from the boss. It said they needed to gather at the company for an emergency meeting. Mrs. Sanazono thought this would be the perfect chance to gauge the boss's mood. It seemed there was no way they could come clean today, because Chao's frown was so deep that it could have crushed a fly. He was the first to speak, asking if any of them had encountered anything strange lately. The 4 of them swallowed nervously. Images of Shiki, Ikematsu, and Cheyenne flashed through their minds one after another. In the end, Bunta gritted his teeth and said no, deciding to hide all these unexpected incidents. Luckily, Joe didn't question him. The reason he had called everyone here was for an important special mission. They were to be responsible for transporting an item, though he couldn't disclose what it was. But this mission was a matter of life and death. Joe told everyone to go home and prepare well, then asked Bunta to stay behind for a private chat. He brought up a huge information tree. On the screen, its proper name was a decision tree, representing the world's big data. Tiny events happening all over the world were interconnected with one another, intertwining and branching out in complex ways. In this way, they shaped the past, the present, and the future. This decision tree was a symbol of the world we lived in, and Sho had a wish that he was determined to fulfill. That was to change the future after the year 2025. All the missions assigned so far had been in service of this wish, although these missions seemed bizarre, and were all concentrated in the small area around Bunta and the other 3. The purpose of this approach was to minimize the impact, to create new intersection points and give birth to a new future. But since July, some unknown variables had appeared on the decision tree, creating unplanned intersection points, so they had to correct the course of events. Otherwise, in 10 years' time, a massive tragedy would occur that would claim the lives of 10,000 people. In short, Bunta and the others were shouldering the lives of 10,000 people in the future. This realization weighed heavily on Bunta's mind. filling him with mixed emotions. How had the promise of being just a little bit of a hero suddenly turned into such a huge burden? Shiki immediately noticed that something was wrong with her husband and gently comforted him, telling him not to worry. She said, "At worst, you can quit your job, and I'll support you." This only made Bunta feel even more uneasy. The next day, he went to find Sakusuke to ask what Shiki's late husband had really been like. He felt that the love he had received from Shiki was stolen from that deceased man. Sakusuke comforted Bunta, telling him not to overthink things. As long as Shiki was happy, that was all that mattered. Why did he have to worry about all the rest? After saying this, Sakusuke went out early to greet Cheyenne, who was getting ready for school. Bunta was shocked. Had Sakusuke already told Cheyenne the truth about his identity? Sakusuke explained that Cheyenne had only come to buy flowers a few times. To Cheyenne, he would always just be the flower shop uncle, and he would take this secret to his grave, so he should keep his chin up too. At the same time, Shiki received a package from her father. She immediately called him to say thank you. She even showed off the necklace that Bunta had given her. Not long after, Mrs. Sanazono came over to chat. Shiki mentioned that she had talked to her father about Bunta that day, but her father had asked who Bunta was. Then her father had guests arriving, so they had to hang up the call. But the more Shiki thought about it, the stranger it seemed. How could her father not know who Bunta was? Mrs. Sanazono had no choice but to explain. She said, "When Mr. Bunta was away on his business trip, your father was very angry that he had left you all alone. He definitely didn't have a good impression of Bunta, so he was just saying that to annoy you." But after hearing this, Shiki became even more determined. She was going to speak more highly of Bunta in front of her father. Mrs. Sanazono quickly tried to stop her. She said, "You don't live with your father anymore, so why go to all this trouble to explain things to him? Besides, Bunta would definitely be upset if he found out about this." Mrs. Sanazono finally talked Shiki out of this idea. Later, she went to the company to pick up new capsules. Although she didn't know what the others thought of the boss, Mrs. Sanazono had always cherished the second chance at life. Once, she had lived in a shabby shack under an overpass. If Cho hadn't appeared, she would have probably died of hunger and cold that winter. In fact, a long time ago, Mrs. Sanazono had been a capable secretary, but she had been sentenced to 10 years in prison for embezzlement, fraud, and forgery of documents. But no one knew that Mrs. Sanazono had just been a scapegoat. The real mastermind behind it all had been a man named Yuki. Yuki had sweet-talked her, showering her with luxury goods and designer labels to win her over. But after she went to prison, he had kicked her while she was down, leaving her completely devastated. Then Cho had appeared with the capsules, giving her a brand new lease on life. The pasts of these superpower holders had now all been revealed. The details of this mission also unfolded right after. At the Odeba shopping mall, a certain organization was going to make a delivery of an item. Bunta and the others' mission was to steal their blue suitcase and throw it into the sea, but they must remember never to take the suitcase on any public transportation. Besides, the whole mission had to be completed within 20 minutes. The four of them got ready and arrived at the Odeba shopping mall. They immediately spotted the man in a suit carrying the blue suitcase. He suddenly put the suitcase down and walked away. Two young men casually walked over and sat down next to the suitcase. They checked their watches, then picked up the suitcase and stood up. Mrs. Sanazono immediately walked over carrying 2 cups of hot water and pretended to accidentally spill them on the two men. Meanwhile, Sakusuke slid across the floor and snatched the suitcase away. When he was almost exhausted from running, he passed the suitcase to Hanzo. They took turns like this, with Bunta running the third leg of the relay. Sakusuke took a taxi to the 4th handoff point, picked up the suitcase, and ran to the seaside. But the suitcase was too light to sink to the bottom of the sea. He was just about to find something heavy to weigh it down with, but Cheyenne walked over, pushed Sakusuke aside, grabbed the suitcase, and ran back to a car. Bunta rushed over to stop him, only to see Akamatsu sitting inside the car. The two of them grabbed the suitcase and began to tussle over it. Cheyenne quickly used his power to electrocute Bunta, pushing him away. It turned out his superpower was electric discharge. Luckily, Mrs. Sanazono's electromagnetic wave ability kicked in, and she remotely locked the car. The 3 young people had to abandon the car and flee, but they were quickly cornered by Bunta and the others in a warehouse. But both sides thought that the other was the villain. Bunta, in particular, kept saying that the suitcase contained a deadly virus. He argued that throwing it into the sea would contaminate the water supply and infect everyone. In any case, neither side could convince the other. Hanzo simply sent a swarm of sea roaches to attack them. Cheyenne was so scared that he dropped the suitcase. The girl with the ponytail also unleashed her ultimate move. Her power was sonic waves. No wonder all her teammates were wearing headphones. But strangely enough, Mrs. Sanazono didn't sense anything at all. Bunta could hear the sound, but it didn't cause him much pain. This mosquito sound, known scientifically as high-frequency sound waves, could be heard clearly by young people, but middle-aged and elderly people, especially those over 40, mostly couldn't hear it at all, or could only hear it faintly. Taking advantage of his age, Bunta pulled off Ikamatsu's headphones and snatched the suitcase, while he was distracted. But before he could even enjoy his victory for 2 seconds, Cheyenne intercepted him and took the suitcase back. At this critical moment, Shiki arrived at the scene and blew Cheyenne away, with a single powerful gust of wind. Then she threw the suitcase to Bunta, who was standing far away. As the group scrambled and fought over the suitcase, they were almost certainly already past the 20-minute deadline. Just then, an old man dressed in white appeared. After the old man finished speaking, he pointed at the 3 young people one by one. The very next second, snowflakes unexpectedly began to fall from the sky. He snapped his fingers, disappeared on the spot, and took Cheyenne and the other 2 with him. No one had any idea what was going on. Then Shiki walked over and opened the suitcase. She found that it was completely empty inside. Bunta couldn't help recalling the thoughts he'd read from Ikamatsu while they were fighting over the suitcase. 10 million people will die because of you. So between Ikamatsu and Cho, who was the liar? At this point, Cho had already spotted Shiki's appearance. The snowflakes swirling all around looked exactly like the ashes from that fatal car crash. Shiki couldn't help thinking of her husband lying on the ground that day. Wasn't that man actually Cho himself? One mystery after another popped up, leaving everyone overwhelmed. Seeing the 3 unknown variables appear, Cho quickly identified their superpowers and identities. First of all, Ikamatsu's power was the ability to force the human body to shed tears and mucus. It wasn't particularly useful. Cheyenne's superpower, to be precise, was the ability to manipulate static electricity. It was quite powerful and had a wide range of applications. Kojo could emit sonic waves, but Cho couldn't find any information about the identity of the old man in white. He had no idea what the old man's purpose was for showing up. Besides that, Cho also found out about the incident where Shiki had accidentally taken the capsule. To check on her condition, Cho planned to meet Shiki in person. He reminded her not to tell anyone about her superpower. As long as she didn't take any more capsules from now on, the power she had accidentally gained would disappear on its own. For some reason, Shiki couldn't shake the feeling that Cho looked familiar. The man who had been lying at the scene of the car crash looked exactly like him. But Cho insisted that it was the first time they had ever met. Shiki had no choice but to drop the subject. But during her class reunion, when her classmates talked about their first meetings with their husbands and their weddings, Cho's face kept flashing through Shiki's mind. She was quite troubled by this. On the other side, Bunta found a bug that Ikamatsu had secretly planted in Hanzo's takoyaki shop and immediately destroyed it. Then he went to stake out the takoyaki club, planning to catch Ikamatsu and get to the bottom of things. He wanted to find out what was going on with the 10 million people will die comment. Ikamatsu said that his boss, I, had hacked into Cho's communications. They had accidentally obtained a copy of a simulation that Cho had run, using big data to create an intersection point. Somewhere could indeed change the future as desired, but the 2 sides had completely different accounts of the future that Cho wanted. Bunta really didn't know who to trust anymore. At the same time, Cho took a fancy to Cheyenne's power, and summoned Sakosuke to his side. He told Sakosuke that Cheyenne was being used by bad people. It might be safer to let Cheyenne join their side. What Cho meant was that Sakosuke could reveal his true identity and bring Cheyenne over to their side. This suggestion put Sakosuke in a terrible dilemma. Perhaps Cheyenne did have the right to know the truth. Besides, he also encouraged Bunta to tell the truth as well, to tell Shiki, even though I'm not your real husband, I truly love you. Even if Bunta wanted to deny it, it was useless. Anyone with eyes could see how he felt about Shiki. Bunta didn't want to deal with this matter for the time being. His top priority was to find out who was lying between Ikamatsu and Cho, so the 4 of them immediately went to the school to look for Ikamatsu. Sakosuke waited upstairs to watch how things would unfold. Bunta and the other 2 were very curious about the identity of the old man in white, but Ikamatsu didn't know who he was either. On that day, as soon as the old man snapped his fingers, they had passed out. When they woke up, they found that everyone at the dock had already left. As for the missions that Cho had been assigning, Kojo had something to say. She had a high school classmate named Yagyu. Yagyu had been the top student in their grade, very outstanding. One day, Yagyu suddenly showed up at Kojo's company to apply for a job. She also said that she was doing a rather strange part-time job that required her to complete all kinds of tasks. Yagyu revealed that several other people were also doing this part-time job. Everyone had their own separate tasks. These included things like stock trading and acquiring real estate. Someone else was supposed to manufacture a certain kind of machinery in an optical factory. Yagyu had been assigned to the pharmaceutical team. Her task was to develop a drug that could grant superpowers to humans. The employer had sent her the formula for the drug. It contained synthetic methods and raw materials that Yagyu had never seen before. But all the missing ingredients were obtained by the other part-timers through their respective tasks. At first, Kojo hadn't believed her, but then Yagyu had demonstrated her own superpower. She could create all kinds of sense at will. Yagyu had trusted Kojo a great deal, and had given her a suitcase to keep safe. But a few days later, the police had contacted Kojo. They had told her to go to the hospital, to claim Yagyu's body, determined to find out the truth. Kojo had gone back and broken open the suitcase. It had been filled with capsules, along with Yagyu's notes and a letter she had written to Kojo. The letter said, "If you're reading this letter, then I must already be dead." All the other partners who had participated in the mission were dead too. No one knew what kind of superpower had killed them. This suitcase was an insurance policy. Yagyu had hidden it in advance. She had hoped that if her life was ever in danger, she might be able to use it to save herself. But if she ended up dying anyway, she begged Kojo to destroy everything inside the suitcase. After hearing this story, everyone fell into a heavy silence. Needless to say, Yagyu's employer had been Sho. Kojo slammed her hand on the table and sent out a signal, hidden in the shadows. Cheyenne immediately unleashed his static electricity. He turned the area into an unstable space, filled with high-density electric charges. If Kojo emitted ultrasonic waves at exactly the same frequency as the area's natural resonant frequency, the molecular bonds would be destroyed by the resonance effect. This would release energy and cause a sonic resonance explosion. Kojo used this to force them to reveal Cho's true identity, but the problem was that Bunta and the others had no idea who Cho really was. Luckily, at this critical moment, Sakosuke tackled Cheyenne to the ground. The static electricity disappeared in an instant. He knew that hurting someone would be considered assault and battery. Sakosuke couldn't bear to watch his son go down the wrong path. The conversation finally came to an abrupt and unsatisfying end. Mrs. Sanazono was the one who trusted the boss the most. That was why Cho had privately instructed her. There might be a traitor among them soon. The last thing Mrs. Sanazono wanted was for everyone to start doubting the boss. In addition, Hanzo had been secretly using crows to keep an eye on Kojo. Because Cho had also talked to him, he had told Hanzo point-blank that he should have been fired for violating company rules, and would lose the peaceful life he currently had. But Cho was willing to give Hanzo a second chance. He told Hanzo to find out the identity of their enemies, to atone for his mistake. At the same time, ever since meeting Cho, Shiki's old memories had been slowly resurfacing. Now the truth was just within reach, like a veil waiting to be lifted.
ふみとだからふみと久志さん違うそんなはずない
It turned out that the nickname her husband had used wasn't from Bunta at all. It had come from Cho's real name. After Shiki had cried herself to sleep, Bunta immediately went to confront Cho. "You were Shiki's real husband, aren't you? Why did you lie to her and make her think you were dead?" As Bunta spoke, he reached out to touch Cho, but his hand passed right through Cho's body.
立体映像です。私の実体は未来にある。
It would be 30 years from now, in 2055, that Cho would regain a physical form. Sakosuke went to warn Ikamatsu, no matter what scheme you're cooking up, don't drag Cheyenne into it. Overwhelmed by emotion, he unleashed a terrifying power that knocked Ikamatsu to the ground. At the end of this episode, the identity of the mysterious mastermind was finally revealed. He was actually Ikamatsu from 30 years in the future. To be precise, Ikamatsu from the future suddenly got in touch. He said that humans had found a way to transmit data. Data has no mass. It's nothing more than a signal made up of zeros and ones. Therefore, as long as it passes through a wormhole in digital space, it can be transmitted from 2055 to 2025. But if it's transmitted to any year beyond 2026, it will get lost. Ikamatsu from the future invented a drug that can grant humans superpowers, but the formula was stolen and transmitted to 2025. This constitutes the arbitrary tampering of history. Since Ikamatsu is the inventor of the drug, if he fails to correct the mistake in time, he'll most likely be sentenced to death. So he had to ask his 2025 self to find the real culprit and stop that person from tampering with history. The future version of Ikamatsu can observe data from all over the world in a certain way. Tampering with the past will place a burden on time and space. Therefore, areas with high load are where the superhumans, who shouldn't exist, are located. This is also why Ikamatsu was spying outside Hanzo's door, because the data indicated that this place had the highest load. On the other side, Cho introduced himself as someone who also came from the future. Bunta couldn't wrap his head around it. If you have a future, that means you never died in the car crash at all. Then why don't you stay by your wife's side?
そうはいかないからあなたがいるんです。今の生活を捨てたいんですか?
Cho explained that Shiki's memories had become susceptible to implantation. Because of something, she might wake up tomorrow and forget everything she found out today. That's why he needed Bunta to continue impersonating him and stay by Shiki's side as her husband. Unwilling to lose his job, Bunta had to apologize and promise to complete the mission. He left. the company with a bitter laugh, but then received a desperate call for help from Sakosuke. He learned that Ikematsu had met with an accident, and was on the verge of death. Cheyenne mistakenly believed that Sakosuke had tried to kill Ikematsu on purpose, so he refused to let Sakosuke get close. Bunta had to rush to Ikematsu's apartment and read his thoughts. Upon hearing this, Cheyenne hurried to the club activity room to find an oxygen tank. After examining Ikematsu, Kojo found that his whole body, including his organs, had become very shriveled. It was highly likely that Sakosuke used the power of reactive oxygen species to accelerate plant growth, and Ikematsu's DNA and cells had been damaged by oxidation, resulting in rapid aging and dehydration. Kojo quickly stuffed a superpower capsule into Ikematsu's mouth. Wasn't his power the ability to manipulate water in the human body? Perhaps Ikematsu could use his own power to help his cells recover. After Ikematsu's condition stabilized, Bunta returned to his residence. He got up bright and early to prepare breakfast for Shiki, and sure enough, just as Cho had said, Shiki had returned to her normal self. She ate breakfast and then went out to work. Bunta let out a sigh of relief. Little did he know that Shiki had detoured to the old laundry shop, where she had worked before she lost her memories. She asked her former colleagues when exactly she had resigned. Her colleagues remembered that starting from April, Shiki had suddenly stopped coming to work. To be precise, it was on the day of the power outage in April. 2 or 3 days later, an agent came to the shop to resign on Shiki's behalf. Bunta received a new mission: place the bottle that was delivered together on the shelf, in the corridor of the takoyaki shop. This time, the mission was conveyed not by phone, but by letter. Although Bunta found it very strange, he still followed the instructions obediently. Afterwards, he went to cook a meal for Ikematsu. It was his way of helping Sakosuke atone for his sins. Luckily, his sincerity paid off. Ikematsu revealed that I was none other than his future self, but they had lost contact now. After hearing what Ikematsu said, Bunta was a little confused. By telling me all these things, aren't you also tampering with history?
そうなる。でも、兆しの改ざんがそれ以上にやばいから、止めるのが優先された。
Right now, there were only two possibilities for the loss of contact with the future Ikematsu. First, the future has already changed for the better, so the future Ikematsu no longer needs to contact the past. Second, due to the tampering of history, the 2025 version of Ikematsu is about to die. In that case, his future self will also cease to exist. To put it plainly, Ikematsu was just a young student. He was now filled with confusion and fear of death. Seeing him like this, Bunta felt a pang of sadness in his heart. At the same time, Mrs. Sanazono was distributing flyers nearby when she passed by the door of the painter Chisumori, whom she had met before. She saw many people coming and going, moving things out. Mrs. Sanazono couldn't help but go forward to ask what was going on, only to learn that Chisumori had died in a car crash back in August. She went back and told Hanzo the news. Both of them felt deeply sorry for Chisumori. He had loved painting so much, and had wanted to make a name for himself in the field. He didn't deserve to die such an obscure death. Even Mrs. Sanazono, who had always trusted the boss, couldn't help but have doubts. Could it be that our missions weren't meant to save people, but to kill them instead? No sooner had she finished speaking, than a new mission arrived on her phone. Place 10 concrete bricks in front of Ikematsu's apartment. Although the two of them had no idea what this was about, they still followed the order and placed the concrete bricks in front of the door. Mrs. Sanazono couldn't help worrying. Was the boss trying to make Ikematsu trip and die? The two of them discussed whether they should place the bricks horizontally, or should they put them in a more conspicuous place, so that Ikematsu would see them at a glance. After much deliberation, they ended up taking the concrete bricks away. On the other side, after returning home, Bunta tested Shiki. Do you still remember where I lived before we got married? Shiki replied that it was an apartment near the station. There was a set meal restaurant nearby. You said their croquettes were delicious. The next day, Bunta went to the restaurant near the station. He ordered Chow's favorite croquette set meal. Unexpectedly, he actually ran into the 2025 version of Cho. The moment the two of them met, the data version of Cho malfunctioned. A shrill alarm also went off from the computer. It indicated that a new intersection point had emerged. The year 2055 had been updated. This tiny change caused the future Ikematsu to go online again. But before they could say 2 words, he logged off again for no apparent reason. At the same time, Cheyenne went to take revenge on Sakosuke, but he accidentally electrocuted the Shiba Inu that Hanzo was raising. Luckily, the static electricity he released wasn't very strong, and the dog didn't suffer any serious injuries, but Sakosuke was tormented by guilt inside. Meanwhile, Bunta realized that the 2025 version of Cho didn't know Shiki at all. It turned out that April 2026 was supposed to be the first time this couple met, but the future version of Cho had come to Shiki's laundry shop as early as April 2025 and revealed his identity to her. Cho explained, 1 year from today, I'll come to this laundry shop, I'll accidentally leave my employee ID in the clothes to be washed. This will be the opportunity for me to meet Shiki, fall in love with her, and marry her. In the future, we'll live on the second floor of the takoyaki shop, and continue our lives together.
そういうの先に知っちゃうと面白くなくない？
今日のことも忘れるから大丈夫。
The future version of Cho pointed to the glass bottle beside him, and said that it was a nano receiver. As long as she drank it, she would be able to receive data, and implant the memories belonging to the future. Shiki didn't want to drink this unknown substance at first, but Cho reassured her repeatedly, the implanted memories would be stored deep in her brain. When she woke up, Shiki would forget everything completely.
だったら何のためにインストールするの？
四季を救うため。
In the end, Shiki drank the contents of the bottle, but why did she still have these memories? Now, with Shiki and Cho facing each other, she finally remembered where things had gone wrong. It turned out that on that night in April 2025, a sudden power outage had occurred at the laundry shop. Since the scale of the outage was very small, it hadn't left any records at all. Therefore, the future Cho hadn't known about it beforehand. That power outage had interfered with Shiki's data loading process, causing the memories that should have been stored deep in her brain to inexplicably surface. This had mixed the future with reality. With her memories in disarray, Shiki had come to the takoyaki shop over and over again, looking for her husband, but in reality, the two of them wouldn't meet for another year. Helpless, Cho had to make the best of the situation, and let her move into the home that the two of them would share in the future. He had arranged for Mrs. Sanazono and the others to help Shiki recover mentally. He had even gone so far as to find someone to impersonate him. Now, Cho had appeared again, because he wanted Shiki to drink the new receiver on the cabinet, to forget all the chaos of the past 6 months, and set everything back to the way it was supposed to be. But Shiki blew the solvent far away and refused Chao's request. No matter how the future was supposed to unfold, the past 6 months had been incredibly real to her. Shiki had already fallen in love with Bunta, not with Cho, who had maliciously manipulated everything. No sooner had she finished speaking then Mrs. Sanazono and the other two also returned to the shop. Taking advantage of the fact that everyone was present, Cho simply came clean. Do you know what the condition was for you to be chosen by me? It was because the four of you, Bunta included, are outside the decision tree. Even if you disappeared, no one would care. You have no impact on this world whatsoever. If it weren't for my intervention, the four of you would have died within this year. Now that the group of superhumans had repeatedly concealed information, and even abandoned a mission once, Cho saw no need to keep them around any longer. He fired Sakosuke, Mrs. Sanazono, and Hanzo on the spot, ordering the three of them to move out of the dormitory by tomorrow. As for Bunta, Cho told him to come to the company, saying he had other arrangements for him. With that, Cho vanished into thin air. Then Sakosuke suddenly shed 2 lines of blood tears. His body went limp and he collapsed to the floor. Hanzo's pet dog said that there was a strange smell on all of them. The strongest smell was on Sakosuke, followed by Mrs. Sanazono, Hanzo, and finally Bunta. Shiki also had a faint hint of it on her. The intensity of the smell exactly matched the order in which they had become superhumans. In other words, Sakosuke's collapse was most likely related to the superpower capsules. Bunta immediately went to confront Cho. He wanted to know if the capsules had any side effects. The latter replied that this was indeed possible. After all, these capsules hadn't even been approved for use in the future. Seeing Chao's vague response, Bunta decided to get straight to the point. He already knew the truth. Virtually everyone from Yagyu's group who had taken the capsules had died. Cho explained that this was because they hadn't known the correct dosage back then. Besides, you were all destined to die anyway. It was just a matter of dying a little earlier, or a little later. What right did you have to be angry with me? Instead of losing his temper, Bunta took a deep breath and handed in his resignation. But Cho said there was a mission that only he could accomplish. Bunta had wanted to refuse outright, but for some reason, after hearing what Cho had to say, he agreed to help. The next day, the takoyaki shop closed its doors for good. Hanzo had no choice but to give away most of his pets. Mrs. Sanazono left alone and desolate. She had absolutely no idea what she was going to live for from now on. As for Sakosuke, he had been in low spirits ever since he accidentally injured Ikamatsu. Bunta went to see Ikamatsu whenever he had the chance. He told them that the superpower capsules had side effects, advising them that they'd better stop taking them. Ikamatsu shot back. Cho clearly knew the capsules were dangerous, yet he tricked you into taking them anyway. Why on earth are you still protecting him?
世界を救う。その意味が分かったんだ。
Ikamatsu and the others didn't press further. Instead, they took out the suitcase Yagyu had left behind. Inside, besides the superpower capsules, there was also the password to Chao's office. Yagyu's team had deliberately left this information behind. But Cho didn't even have a physical body. Superpowers were completely useless against him. Sneaking into his office would be no easy feat. When Bunta got home, he hid all the capsules. Then he discussed with Shiki the idea of moving somewhere else to start a new life. Bunta suggested, why don't we go to Onashima? Haven't you been wanting to go there for a long time? Even though that desire was influenced by the memories from the future, we can create new memories there together. Shiki was overjoyed at the idea. The next day, she set off for Onashima with Bunta. They treated this trip like a real date, but when they actually arrived at Onashima, the memories from the future became even more vivid. Scenes of the happy times she was supposed to spend with Cho flashed through her mind one after another. Even though none of those things had actually happened yet, Shiki's mind had already stored them as memories. This trip was less about creating new memories, and more about chasing the ones that were supposed to be hers. Taking the opportunity, Bunta pulled out the test tube, and told Shiki to drink its contents. Drinking it would make her forget everything that had happened in the past 6 months. Everything would then proceed according to its original course. This was the mission Cho had entrusted to Bunta.
私はあなたを選んだんだよ。
四季さん、嘘ついちゃいけないよ。
Bunta didn't even need to touch her to hear Shiki's thoughts. As soon as they arrived at Onashima, she had stopped calling him Bunchan, because Shiki had finally realized that the Bunchan in her memories had always been Cho. There was another, more important reason why Bunta had made this decision. It turned out that Cho had told him that it was actually Shiki who had died in that future car crash. That was why Cho had gone to such great lengths to travel back in time, trying to change history, to save the love of his life. As soon as the 2055 version of Cho learned that there was a way to communicate with the past, he first contacted an investor. He told the investor about the future economic trends, using this information to accumulate wealth. He then asked the investor for help. He hired a team of technicians and researchers, telling them to create technologies that didn't belong to this era, things like the holographic communication device that allowed Cho to manifest himself, as well as the memory receivers and superpower capsules. Once all these preparations were in place, Cho selected people who were easy to manipulate. He convinced them to take the superpower capsules. After all, humans were fascinated by unknown powers. Ordinary people would be deluded into thinking that they could actually save the world. This grand title would make Bunta and the others jump headfirst into the trap without a second thought. Little did they know that completing missions and changing the world were just lies made up by Cho. From start to finish, he had only ever wanted to save Shiki and no one else, even if it meant the deaths of 100,000, 1 million, or even 10 million people. Cho didn't care. Unluckily, the intervention of the future Ikamatsu had ruined Cho's original plan. Now he had to come up with a backup plan. He had added a trigger to the memory erasing solution, entrusting Bunta with the task of getting Shiki to drink it. This way, the trigger would become a subconscious impulse, buried deep in Shiki's mind, making her unconsciously stay away from that fateful road, filling her with a sense of foreboding whenever she got close to it. But now Shiki was stubbornly refusing to drink it. Bunta had to say something cruel on purpose. He told Shiki, "To me, you were just a mission that's now in the past. Forgetting these past 6 months will help me rid myself of this heavy burden." With that, Bunta turned to leave. Shiki quickly reached out and grabbed him.
愛してる。あなたを愛してる。
心の声はもう聞こえないんです。
Bunta left Shiki behind, his heart breaking into pieces. Homeless, Hanzo took temporary shelter under an overpass. Mrs. Sanazona was also left with nowhere to go, unable to find any meaning in her life. She reignited her desire to avenge herself by killing Yuki, just as the group of superhumans fell into an unprecedented state of confusion. Cho secretly sent new recruits to kidnap Ikamatsu. Kojo had seen it happen, but she hadn't been able to stop them in time. She had to follow the kidnappers and sneak into Chao's company. Taking advantage of the kidnappers' distraction, she sneaked into the office and used the password Yagyu had left to unlock the computer. Outside the door, Cho was talking to Ikamatsu. He said, "If you agree to do me a favor, my 2055 self will turn himself in to the authorities voluntarily. This way, the future you won't be sentenced to death for leaking the capsule formula. The condition is that you must back down and stop meddling in my affairs from now on." Upon hearing this, Ikamatsu couldn't help but ask Cho, "Why on earth do you want to kill 10 million people?" No sooner had he finished speaking than Shiki arrived outside the door. Overhearing Cho's explanation, he said he had someone he wanted to save, someone he had run tens of thousands of simulations for. This was the only way to save her, but it would cost the lives of 10 million people. On the one hand, Ikamatsu thought this man was insane. On the other hand, he realized that if Cho succeeded in changing history, then the act of trying to tamper with the past would no longer exist. The theft of the capsules would never have happened, although this would allow Ikamatsu to walk away unscathed. Now that he knew the truth, he couldn't just stand by and let 10 million people die. So Ikamatsu couldn't agree to Cho's proposal. Rejected. Cho said nothing more. He sensed something was wrong in the office, and rushed over to check. but Kojo heard him coming and quickly hid. At the same time, Shiki unbound Ikamatsu, and from the conversation she had just heard, she realized that it was actually her, who had died in that car crash, and that all these disasters were happening because of her. Shiki returned home, dug out the toxic superpower capsules, and prepared to swallow them all. Shiki's actions caused the decision tree to collapse. Repeatedly, Bunta detected something wrong from a distance. He was about to run over to check on things, when he got a call from Hanzo. He learned that Sanazono had taken more capsules, and planned to kill her old enemy Yuki. By then, she had already sneaked into Yuki's parking garage. Seeing the crazy woman show up at his door, Yuki hurried toward the emergency exit to escape. But Sanazono used her electromagnetic wave ability to lock the electronic door in advance. What's more, Sanazono was wearing a bunch of remote controls to amplify her superpowers. She jammed his phone so Yuki couldn't call the police, then she drastically raised the temperature inside the garage. When Bunta and the other two arrived at the scene, the roller shutter door had become scaldingly hot, and surprisingly, Bunta could hear Sanazono's inner thoughts through the door.
おかしいわよ。幸せになりたいだけだったのに、必要とされたかった。
Watching Sanazono was about to betray her original intentions, and cause a catastrophe, the three of them quickly pried. The door opened to stop her, then carried Sanazono out of the garage. In the end, all four of them hugged each other and wept bitterly, finally letting out all the frustration and grievance they had bottled up these days. Little did they know, Shiki had almost finished all her capsules. Luckily, she didn't die in the end, because Shiki realized that if she died just like that, would Cho do something even more insane, continuing to tamper with history and getting more people killed. How on earth could this dilemma be solved? If they could find Cho from this time period and kill him, they could stop everything. But if they did that, only she and Bunta would find happiness, and that would be completely unfair to Cho.
どっちも殺せばいいんだ。二人とも殺します。
Unluckily, Bunta thought Shiki had already forgotten the memories of these past 6 months, and didn't dare to show up in front of her again. Just then, Ikamatsu sent over a video. It was footage from a pinhole camera Hiseijo had installed in Cho's office. In the video, Cho was making a voice recording. He mistakenly believed that the collapse of the decision tree was caused by uncertain factors like Ikamatsu, and that the only way to fix it was to eliminate all unplanned variables. So he planned to eliminate Ikamatsu, Hiseijo, and Cheyenne. Christmas was approaching, and the mall would soon hold a celebration event. At that time, the LED panels on the ceiling would fall down. The cause of this accident was that the construction team had cut equipment costs, resulting in insufficient screw strength. At that time, 100 people would be crushed and 34 would die. It would be a shocking headline-making incident. Cho, who came from the future, knew the exact time of this accident. He planned to lure the three of them there. With a fake email, no one would notice that they were never supposed to be there. This way, he could eliminate the threat and save the decision tree, with minimal impact on the world. Unluckily, he didn't realize he was already under surveillance. Bunta, Ikamatsu, and the others gathered to discuss countermeasures. Although they could easily ignore the fake email and not go, Cho would definitely not let it go. The best way to eliminate them later would be to create a new timeline branch, one that would definitely affect Cho's future development, and disrupt his original database. After making up his mind, Bunta planned to pretend to fall for the trap, and save the 34 people who were about to be crushed to death. Ikamatsu couldn't help but retort, that would be tampering with history, which was a serious crime in the future. Bunta said, as you just mentioned, it's only a crime in the future. We are people from 2025 in the first place. This isn't tampering with history, it's creating history. On the day of the Christmas gathering, Ikamatsu and the other two pretended to fall for the trick, and sat chatting under the LED screen, while Bunta and the others waited for the right moment. From a high vantage point, Hanzo had summoned a swarm of wasps to scare away the people at the gathering. Sanazono also heated up the bladders of passers-by everywhere, making them rush to the restroom with a sudden urge to pee. Cho detected the emergence of a new timeline junction, the future scenario updated, and he immediately teleported to the gathering scene. He demanded to know what Bunta was up to. The latter replied that even a tiny bee could change the fate of the Earth, not to mention saving 34 people who were supposed to die. These lives, one after another, would eventually affect the year 2055 and update the future. Cho. As soon as he finished speaking, the holographic projection indeed began to flicker. Cho's memories also started to become disorganized, but he had made the voice recording precisely to prevent such a situation. If Cho forgot what he was doing, he just needed to check the recording. Bunta used the time while Cho was restoring his memories to send a signal to Hanzo and the others. Hanzo and the others immediately called out the new employees working at Cho's company, told them about the side effects of the capsules, then dismissed everyone. Finally, everyone brought over Cho from 2025. At this point, The future version of Cho had fully restored his memories. He was furious to see his past self there. He asked Bunta if he didn't want to save Shiki anymore. I've already simulated every possible scenario. Even if you bring my past self here, it won't help. To save Shiki, 10 million people have to be sacrificed. But Bunta said that was the result of the previous simulations. The world is constantly changing. There must be many solutions we haven't tried yet. We can save Shiki together. Unexpectedly, Shiki showed up at the Christmas gathering, ready to carry out her own plan and kill both of them. But Cho was a holographic projection, which was more difficult to deal with. So Shiki decided to target Bunta first. She unleashed a hurricane, pinning Bunta against the wall. Witnessing this, Cho finally had an epiphany. It turned out that Shiki was the reason behind the collapse of the decision tree. He rushed over to stop her, but Shiki was determined to end everything. She let Bunta go and grabbed Cho from 2025, walked under the LED screen, intending to die together with him. The 2025 version of Cho, who had no idea what was going on, tried to escape but was immobilized by the wind. Bunta hurried over and grabbed Shiki.
こうするしかないの。死にたくない。私たちがいなくなるしかないの。怖い。
Bunta read Shiki's inner thoughts. At the critical moment, he pushed her out of the way. Just as Bunta was about to be crushed to death, the mysterious old man who had appeared before popped up again and snapped his fingers. It turned out, the old man was Cho from the year 2070. He enlightened his 2055 self. A person can only experience the past, not change it. The past you're trying to change is the present moment for Shiki, and the 2025 version of you. So let go and leave it to the people of this time. Cho from 2055 finally let go of his obsession, and chose to leave, and for some reason, Shiki had lost the memories of these past 6 months. She accidentally met the 2025 version of Cho in the hospital. The two chatted about the accident that had just happened at the gathering. Shiki unconsciously touched the necklace around her neck. Cho was slightly surprised and quickly said that he had just lost his phone. Luckily, a cleaner had helped him retrieve it. My phone also has a B pendant hanging from it. The two hit it off and chatted more and more happily. They didn't notice the cleaner walking past behind them. It turned out that the cleaner who had helped retrieve the phone was none other than Bunta. He and Hanzo and the others had been playing matchmaker for Shiki and Cho, helping everything get back on its original track, and Bunta and the others had also found their next goal. They were going to start by saving themselves, and live on more bravely. And that's where the story ends. A little bit of superpower may not seem like much, but it's enough to save someone else's life. An ordinary person may not be able to achieve great things, but they are more than enough to influence the development of the future, from start to finish. What the film wants to convey is that, even tiny power can change everything. Bunta, once a failure, gradually grew through this opportunity, from having tiny superpowers, to changing key junctions, and then to saving lives. He proved to us the resilience of a human being. No matter when, never give up hope. Sometimes, saving yourself is also a kind of superpower.